Hey everyone! Alright, I'm finally doing a video on how to smock. It's probably been my most requested video so far, so here, let's go. Let's get this over with, right? No, I'm not going to go over the pleating, so if you need instructions on how to pleat, go see my video on how to do that. I will link that below. But as far as smocking, the most common way to smock is to use embroidery floss. And here you can see I'm pulling the embroidery floss out from the end with the long label. As you see, there's two labels on this thing. I'm using the one with the long label on it, and I'm pulling out two rungs of this. So it's like you pull out one and two sort of things, and you'll get to the next fold, if you will. The part that you cut, for whatever reason, the part that you cut is the part that you tie. Now I have tied the other end before and it's worked out just fine, but I think technically you're supposed to tie the end that you cut for whatever S-wrap or T-wrap, or I don't know. I haven't gotten into that detailed of knowledge yet. But what I do is I divide it into three, and then you can see with my hands, I just sort of separate like this, like with my index finger from my right hand, and then I hold the floss in my left hand, as you can see in this video, and I separate it so I've got two groups and they each have 3 strands of floss in the group. And then from there I separate each individual floss. And the idea of separating your floss like this, what you're trying to get at is you're trying to get all that tension out of your floss. Because really the goal in smocking with floss is to keep it as flat and straight as possible, because if it's got all that tension and it's all twisted up, it won't be as pretty. And I'll get into more of that in a second. So you can see, to put it back together, once all the tension is out of it, I just take my index and thumb and I just sort of go along the floss, bringing it back together. I'm really glad there's a visual for this, because describing it by words, I'm just sort of failing at. So I hope you're getting the idea with the video. So once you have your thread back together, and it's okay if it twists a little bit as you put it back together, then you're going to thread your needle, and if you have to lick the end of that floss in order to thread the needle, just cut off the spot that has your lickage on it. Alright, so when you pleat something, what I like to do when I pleat something is have the top and bottom rows a holding row. So really I only smock the rows in the middle. So in this case I've got 5 rows. That top row and that bottom row I'm not going to smock. I'm just going to smock the 3 in the middle. So what you're going to do is go back to the wrong side of your work, and I go through 2 pleats. This is how I do it. I go through 2 pleats like you're seeing here to make a little loop, and then I'll go through the loop once or twice. Here I'm going through it twice, and that makes a knot, and I've sort of sewn a knot onto my work. And then I come up through the first pleat. I'm just ignoring those pleats to the left, and I'm calling this one my first pleat. So from here, you can start your smocking. A couple things when you smock. First, you want to make your needle as parallel to those lines as possible. You don't want it to be crooked. And then you see how I'm twisting my floss on purpose here. You want your floss to be flat. So I'm trying to show you the difference between having it twisted and having it what I call flat. And then when you go to smock, you can see I'm only going through like the first third of the pleat or so. I'm not going all the way down in that valley. And so until it's kind of taut. You don't want to pull it so it's too tight. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. So this is the cable stitch, and in order for this stitch to be as pretty as it can, you want your floss to be, flat, not twisted. And you also want to have your cables like in line with each other, so you can use your thumb or your needle to smoosh that in line with each other. And sometimes this happens where your floss will get knotted up on itself, and you just sort of pick it out and go on about life. Now I guess you could put beeswax on your floss in order for it to not knot as much or whatever, to reduce that, but look of beeswax makes it undesirable, so I don't use beeswax. So you can see that I tightened that last stitch up too much and it just looks squashed. So I pulled it back out. I loosened a little bit, but you just keep on going. Now I am alternating my thread by going up and down in order to get that cable to look how it is. Now here on purpose I did it wrong. I kept it down when it should have gone up. And to show you that if you make that same mistake, you can just put your needle on up or on down, whatever way corrects your mistake, in order to keep on going. It's really not that big of a deal. And I just sort of twist my thread as I go along just to keep it flat and not twisted. Now every once in a while your thread can get so twisted that I do this number. I just sort of take my nail on my thumb and I slide it up that floss to try to get the tension out. Now sometimes it gets so twisted that I just take my needle off, I separate the 3 strands of flosses, and then I go about life. Smocking with floss is not the most fun thing to do. It's not my favorite thing to smock with. I prefer to smock with pearl cotton because you don't have to deal with any of this sort of stuff. But to go on, if we're to pretend this is now my first pleat, I'm going up through like the first third or so of that pleat, and I'm going to show the wave stitch now. You start it like the cable stitch, and you can noticing that 2 pleats form a stitch. So now I'm going to that next pleat, like not that one, but this one here, and I'm going to put that stitch in there. You want to try to avoid putting your stitches on top of or in the same space as the thread, your pleater thread, because you don't want to actually go through your pleating thread. But if it does happen, it's not the worst in the world. You just want to try to avoid it if you can. And you can see those 2 pleats make that stitch, so I'm going on to the next pleat, and I'm keeping my needle just as parallel as possible to keep the stitches as straight as possible so they're not crooked, and this becomes the wave stitch. I mean, you're basically doing the same motion as the cable stitch. You're just doing on 2 different rows of pleats, whereas the cable stitch is just all on the same row. So the next stitch that I'm going to show you is the trellis stitch, and there are many different kinds of trellis, but basically you start off like the cable stitch. So you're going to have your top part of the trellis, which is right there when I made it, and then however many stitches you go on between the top and the bottom, that's how you name this trellis. So you can have like a 2-step trellis if you've got 2 stitches in between the top and bottom, or a 3-step trellis if you've got 3 stitches on the top and bottom, etc., etc. So I think I did a 4-step trellis here, where I'm doing 4 stitches in between the top and bottom. So I'm just going down until I get to the bottom row, and I'm just showing this for kicks and grins. I could have just done this in between that 2nd and 3rd row of pleats, but I decided to take it down to that 4th row. So here's the bottom of my trellis, and now I'm going back up, and I'm trying to align the stitches on either side of that trellis, again keeping my floss as flat and not twisted as possible. And my cameraman just sneezed, sorry about that. I mean, it's not going to be perfectly symmetric. That's part of the charm of something that's handmade, is that it's not perfect. But you can see there's a trellis right there, and then I would go back down the other direction. Now, to tie off, what you're going to do is take your needle, well, at least what I do is I take my needle and I put it in the valley there. So I'm putting it in between my last 2 pleats, and then I flip my work over, and I do 1 stitch in there just as like an anchor, if you will, so I'm not like tensing up that last pleat, and then I do another stitch in there to create my loop, go through the loop 2 times, and I pull it tight, and that's my knot, and then I'm going to cut it off. Now the last stitch I want to show you on this very basic video of smocking is the stem stitch. And so this is similar to the cable stitch, however, you don't alternate your floss. So you can see I'm going to just keep mine on the above. So I'm just keeping my floss on top and on top and on top, and I just keep on doing the stitches, and I don't alternate my floss at all, and that starts to make the stem stitch. So once you're all done, you just cut your knots off from your pleating threads, and you pull those out. Like I said, every once in a while you go through those pleating threads and you'll feel like the tension when you start to pull on them because the floss is through it, but I've never had my floss break. Just keep on tugging and the pleating threads will eventually come out. I've never had an issue with that. I mean, you try to avoid it, but sometimes you can't. So there's a ton of different smocking designs out there. Those stitches I just showed you make up a bunch of them. It's basically a combination of waves, trellis, and cable stitches. Here's that stem stitch where I married the top and the bottom together. You can see that's a neat little design there. But for the most part, I mean, you can see all these designs, they're all comprised of trellises, waves, and cable stitches. There are other stitches out there, like the honeycomb, and there's picture smocking, but for the most part, it's cables, waves, and trellises. Here is smocking with pearl cotton. That's what I prefer to smock with. But I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. As always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.